There is a wildfire burning in southeastern Oregon tonight that grew by 268 square miles in a single day, an area larger than the city of Chicago, between one morning report and the next. The federal government has 65 people assigned to it. No hand crews, no helicopters, 11 engines. That is one line in a document the National Interagency Fire Center published at 7:30 this morning, free and public, and it is not the only one. In the same report, there are fires with extreme fire behavior, homes threatened, evacuations already underway, and a personnel column that reads 0. Something is spreading across the Pacific Northwest that is not really about fire at all. So how does the most powerful firefighting system on Earth end up watching a fire the size of a major city with 65 people and no aircraft? If you want the real answer, hit the like button and subscribe to the Sky Lab, because we will be following this one all season. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from and whether the smoke has reached your town yet this summer. Now, let's get into it. Part 1. The report nobody reads. There is a document that the United States government publishes every single morning, and almost nobody in this country has ever opened it. It is not classified. It is not hidden behind a paywall or buried in an archive. It is a free PDF posted to a public website by the National Interagency Fire Center in Boise, Idaho, and it goes up at roughly the same time every day while most of the country is still asleep. It is called the Incident Management Situation Report. It is written in a flat-clipped bureaucratic register that seems specifically designed to keep you from reading it. Columns of abbreviations, acreage figures, agency codes, estimated containment dates. The kind of document that looks like homework. The edition published on Sunday, July 26, 2026, at 7:30 in the morning Mountain Daylight Time, contains a sentence that is 2 words long. National Preparedness Level 5. That is it. That is the whole line. It sits near the top of the first page, above the acreage tables, above the fire names, above everything. And if you know what those 2 words mean, you do not really need to read the rest of the document, because everything after them is just the elaboration. Let me give you the elaboration anyway, because the numbers are the reason I am making this video. On the morning of July 26th, the United States had 117 active large fire incidents burning. Those incidents covered 1,865,931 cumulative acres. Fighting them were 25,310 people. 90 of those fires were uncontained. 30 complex incident management teams were committed, plus 2 National Incident Management Organization teams, which are the small, elite, permanent groups that get sent when a fire is too complicated for a normal team. Those are the national totals. Now here is the line for one geographic area, the one the fire community calls the Northwest, which is Oregon and Washington and nothing else. 52 incidents, 1,136,986 cumulative acres, 382 crews, 905 engines, 75 helicopters, 15,110 people. I want you to do the division with me, because it is the kind of arithmetic that changes how a map looks. 1,136,000 acres out of 1,865,000 acres. That is roughly 61%. 61% of every acre currently burning on an active large incident in the United States of America is burning in 2 states. 15,110 people out of 25,310 people. That is roughly 60%. 6 out of every 10 wildland firefighters deployed anywhere in this country, on any fire in any state, are standing in Oregon or Washington right now. 52 of the nation's 90 uncontained large fires are there. 19 of the 30 committed incident management teams are there. And here is the part that took me a while to sit with. Look at the rest of the map in that same report. Alaska is at Preparedness Level 1 with 0 incidents. The Southwest is at Level 2. Northern California, Southern California, the Northern Rockies, the Great Basin, the Rocky Mountain area, all at Level 3. The Eastern area is at Level 4. The Southern area is at Level 2. Only 2 entries in the entire document sit at Level 5, the nation as a whole and the Northwest. It is worth understanding what that document actually is, because it is not a press release, and it is not written for you or me. The Incident Management Situation Report is an operational product. It is compiled overnight from figures that individual incident management teams file into a federal system, and it goes out every morning to dispatch centres, coordination centres, agency administrators, and geographic area coordinators across the country. It is the document a duty officer in Georgia reads to find out whether their crews are about to get ordered to Oregon. It is the document a coordination centre in Utah reads to work out whether they can spare an engine strike team. It is, in a very real sense, the daily accounting ledger of American firefighting, and everything in it is written by people who assume their reader already knows the vocabulary. Which is why nothing in it is dramatised. There are no adjectives in the acreage table. When the document says a fire is exhibiting extreme fire behaviour, that is not a writer reaching for emphasis. It is a defined operational term with a specific meaning about flame length, spread rate, spotting distance, and crown involvement. When it says numerous structures are threatened, somebody has counted. The flatness of the language is exactly what makes the numbers underneath it worth taking seriously. And the numbers underneath it, on July 26th, describe a country whose fire resources have almost entirely relocated to one place. 25,310 people, 382 crews in the Northwest alone out of 565 nationally, 905 engines out of 1,501, 75 helicopters out of 141. Read those three pairs in a row. 2 out of every 3 crews in the country, 3 out of every 5 engines, more than half of every helicopter, all in Oregon and Washington, now. I want to be extremely careful about the word in the title of this video because I do not want anyone walking away from this with the wrong idea about what I'm claiming. When I say something more sinister than a typical wildfire is spreading across the Pacific Northwest, I am not talking about arson. I am not talking about directed energy weapons or engineered ignition or any of the things that circulate every single time the West catches fire. We are going to get to those claims later in this video, in detail, honestly, and I'm going to show you exactly what the evidence supports and what it does not. Some of those claims contain a real grievance. One of them, as you will see, contains a kernel that is genuinely correct, and I'm going to tell you which one. But that is not what the word means here. What I am describing is structural. What is happening in Oregon and Washington in late July of 2026 is not one enormous fire behaving badly. It is not even a dozen enormous fires behaving badly. It is a system-level event. Dozens of simultaneous large fires, most of them started by lightning, burning in fuels that carry flame faster than crews can cut line, in a region where the pool of available people has already been drained down to the bottom, and where individual fires are now being left with almost nobody on them at all. Which brings me to the thing I actually want you to take out of the next 2 hours. The most alarming number in the Incident Management Situation Report of July 26, 2026 is not an acreage figure. It is a staffing figure. There is a single line in that report, one row in one table, describing one fire in southeastern Oregon, and when I first read it I assumed it was a typographical error. I checked it against a second federal feed. It was not an error. That fire and the number of human beings assigned to it is the reason this video exists, and we're going to spend a long time on it. But to understand why that line is as bad as it is, you first have to understand what those 2 words at the top actually measure, because Preparedness Level 5 is not a description of the weather. It is a description of what is left. Part 2, what Level 5 actually means. Almost every scale you encounter in a natural disaster measures the disaster. The Saffir-Simpson scale measures a hurricane's wind speed. The Richter and moment magnitude scales measure an earthquake's energy release. The enhanced Fujita scale measures a tornado's damage. The NOAA space weather scales, which regular viewers of this channel have heard me walk through more times than they probably wanted, measure the strength of a geomagnetic storm. Every one of those is a statement about the phenomenon. The National Preparedness Level is not. It is a statement about us. The scale runs from 1 to 5, and it is set by a body called the National Multi-Agency Coordinating Group, which sits at the National Interagency Fire Center in Boise and is made up of representatives from the federal land management agencies, the Forest Service, and the states. Their job is to look at what is burning, what is forecast to burn, and critically, what is left in the drawer: crews, engines, aircraft, incident management teams, overhead personnel, dozers, camp support, the unglamorous logistics that let 10,000 people live in a field for a month. At the low end of the scale, life is normal. Geographic areas handle their own incidents with their own resources. Nobody is calling anybody for help. As the level climbs, the areas begin borrowing from each other. This is the whole design philosophy of the American wildland fire system, and it is genuinely elegant when it works. The country is carved into 10 geographic areas, and the fundamental assumption is that they will not all be on fire at the same time. Alaska burns in June. The Southwest burns in May and early June before the monsoon arrives. The Great Basin and the Northwest peak in late July and August. The southern area burns in late winter and spring. California increasingly burns whenever it feels like it. Because those seasons are staggered, an area that is quiet can lend its crews to an area that is not. A hotshot crew based in Georgia can spend August in Idaho. Engines from Florida can end up on a fire line in Montana. The system is in effect a mutual insurance policy written across a continent, and like every insurance policy it works because the claims do not all arrive on the same day. That stagger is not a hopeful assumption. It is a real, physical, climatological pattern, and for most of the 20th century it held remarkably well. Alaska's fire season is compressed into a narrow window of long days and lightning after breakup and before the rains. The Southwest burns in the pre-monsoon window when the air is at its driest and before the July rains arrive to shut it down. The southern area's fire season is genuinely a winter and spring phenomenon, driven by cured hardwood litter and frontal winds. The Great Basin and the Northwest come into their worst weeks in late July and August, after the winter moisture has been baked out of the fine fuels but before the autumn pattern change. Because those windows do not overlap much, a crew is a national asset rather than a local one. A hotshot crew based in Georgia can spend August in Idaho. Engines from Florida can finish a rotation in Montana. Type 1 incident management teams, the small groups of experienced overhead who run the biggest and most complicated fires, rotate around the country all summer, going wherever the complexity is. In a normal year, a firefighter might work 4 states in a season. The whole architecture is in effect a mutual insurance policy written across a continent. And like every insurance policy, it works because the claims do not all arrive at once. Preparedness Level 5 is the formal, published on-the-record admission that the claims have all arrived on the same day. The official language is careful and dry, and it says that the majority of national resources are committed, that geographic areas can no longer reliably support one another, and that national and international mobilization is underway. Read that middle clause again, because it is the load-bearing one. Geographic areas can no longer reliably support one another. The insurance policy has stopped paying out. This is not a forecast. It is a solvency statement. And notice the last phrase in the official description, because it is the one people skip. National and international mobilization is underway. International. At the top of the scale, the United States starts making calls to Canada, to Australia, to New Zealand, to Mexico. Countries with reciprocal wildland fire agreements, and, in the case of the Southern Hemisphere partners, crews who are in their off-season and available. That arrangement has been used repeatedly over the last decade in both directions. It is an admirable piece of international cooperation, and it is also, unmistakably, what you do when you have run out of your own people. There is one more marker of the same thing sitting in the July 26th report, and it is easy to miss because it is only 2 words in a summary line. 2 National Incident Management Organization teams committed. NEMO teams are not ordinary incident management teams. There are only a handful of them in the entire country. They are small, usually about 7 people, permanently staffed with some of the most experienced incident commanders and operations chiefs in American wildland fire, and they exist to be dropped into situations that are too complicated, too politically sensitive, or too long-running for a conventional rotating team to handle. Committing a NEMO team is a statement that the complexity has exceeded what the normal structure can absorb. On July 26th, both of the committed NEMO teams were working the same complex of fires in the Superior National Forest in Minnesota, with a transfer of command from one to the other scheduled for the following day. And now I want you to look at the calendar, because this is the part that made me stop and check the date on the file. It is July, the historical peak of the Western fire season, the stretch when the largest fires in modern American history have started, when the fuels are driest and the winds are strongest, and the crews are most exhausted, is still ahead. August, September. In California, October. The country has reached the top of its own preparedness scale before the season has arrived at its worst month. There is one more thing: Preparedness Level 5 changes, and it is operational rather than descriptive, and it is going to matter enormously later in this video. Under normal conditions, when a fire starts and an incident commander orders resources, the request goes into the system and gets filled. Not instantly, not always completely, but the underlying logic is that if you need 20 engines, the system tries to find you 20 engines. At level 5, that stops. Allocation is no longer a matter of asking. It becomes a national priority ranking, and that ranking is dominated by one factor above all others: threat to human life, followed by threat to property. I want to be very clear that this is the correct rule. I'm not going to stand here and pretend there is some obviously better system that nobody thought of. If you have one hotshot crew and 2 fires, and one of them is burning toward a town of 4,000 people, and the other is burning across empty rangeland, you send the crew to the town. Every time. There is no serious argument against that, and anyone who tells you otherwise has not thought about it for more than 10 seconds. But a correct rule, applied under conditions of genuine scarcity, produces an outcome nobody sat down and designed. And I'm going to hold that thought for a few minutes because you need to see one more number first. Look at the geographic area table in the July 26th report the way you would read a story rather than a spreadsheet, and the shape of the emergency comes right out of the page. Alaska. 0 incidents, 0 acres, 0 people. The Southwest. 3 incidents, 37,000 acres, and 11 personnel. 11 in an area that covers Arizona and New Mexico. The Southern area. 17 incidents and 497 people. Northern California, 9 incidents, 86,000 acres, 2,180 people. And then the Northwest. 52 incidents, 15,110 people. The fires are the symptom. The distribution of human beings is the diagnosis, which is why the single most revealing number in the entire July 26th report is not in the Northwest column at all. It is in the column right next to it, the one that shows what changed in 24 hours. Part 3. The change column. Every row in the resource summary table has a small column at the end that most people would skip. It shows the change in personnel since the previous day's report, plus this many, minus that many. It is the kind of detail that exists for logistics officers and nobody else. On July 26th, the national change in personnel was positive 2,245. That means that in 24 hours, the American Wildland Fire System put an additional 2,245 people onto fire lines somewhere in the United States. That is a genuinely large mobilization. It is a small town's worth of people, packed, briefed, flown, or driven, and assigned in a single day. On the same report, the change in personnel for the Northwest was positive, 2,149. Take a second with those two numbers side by side. 2,245 nationally, 2,149 to Oregon and Washington, 96%. 96% of every additional wildland firefighter mobilized anywhere in the United States of America on that day went to 2 states. The other 9 geographic areas, every fire in California, Colorado, Montana, Idaho, Utah, Nevada, Arizona, New Mexico, Minnesota, Florida, the Carolinas, all of it, netted 96 people between them. And netted is doing real work in that sentence, because 4 of those 9 areas did not gain people at all. They lost them. Northern California, minus 162. That is an area sitting at Preparedness Level 3 with 9 active incidents and 86,000 acres burning, and it gave up 162 people. The Rocky Mountain area, minus 277. 10 incidents, 222,000 acres, and it released 277 people. The Southwest, minus 7 from a starting point of 18. The Southern area, minus 29. Those crews were not sent home because their fires went out. Some were released, some were reassigned, and the direction they were reassigned in is not hard to guess. That is what triage looks like at continental scale. It is a hospital that has decided which ward gets the nurses, The areas that did gain, gained small. Great Basin, plus 223. Southern California, plus 163. Northern Rockies, plus 102. Eastern area, plus 83. These are the numbers of a system where everybody is holding and nobody is helping. I want to draw out what that actually means for you, because I suspect most people watching this do not live in Oregon or Washington and are wondering why any of this concerns them. Here is why. If a significant fire starts tomorrow near where you live, in the foothills outside Denver, in the hills above Los Angeles, in the Pine Barrens of New Jersey, in the Ozarks, anywhere, the speed and size of the response you get is now being determined by decisions made about Oregon and Washington. Not because anyone is punishing you, because the people are already there. The national system has spent the last week emptying itself into one corner of the map, and everyone standing outside that corner is exposed in a way they were not 2 weeks ago. The Northwest Zone activity numbers in that report tell you why the emptying has not stopped. 15 new fires in the area in one day, 5 new large incidents, 52 uncontained large fires, 19 incident management teams committed, 3,648 acres burned in the area the previous day, which sounds almost modest, until you remember that the acreage from the very largest fires does not land in that column on the same clock. And then there is a line near the top of the national section that I found genuinely difficult to read without laughing at the bureaucratic understatement of it. Initial attack activity, light. 159 fires, light. On a day when the country is at the top of its preparedness scale, when 60% of its firefighters are in 2 states, when 4 geographic areas are shedding personnel, on that day, the United States caught 159 new fire starts, and the official characterization of that workload is light. That is not a criticism of whoever wrote it. It is technically accurate. Initial attack activity is graded against what the system normally handles, and 159 new starts across a continent genuinely is a modest day by that standard. But it tells you something about the baseline this country has quietly accepted, that 159 new wildfires in 24 hours does not register as a busy morning. There is a related figure in the same summary that most readers would skim past, and it is arguably the clearest single measure of whether a fire season is being won or lost on a given day. Uncontained large fires, 90. That is the running inventory. Every one of those 90 is an open problem that requires people, and it does not close until somebody puts a line around it. Against that inventory, the country contained 6 large fires on July 26th, and picked up 10 new ones. 10 new large incidents nationally, 6 large fires contained. Net for the day, the country lost ground, and the 5 new large incidents in the Northwest that day are worth naming, because they show you how a system at capacity keeps having to absorb new work regardless of whether it has room. On July 26th, the Northwest picked up the Grasshopper Fire on the Mount Hood National Forest, the Bradeen Hill Fire 17 miles southwest of Colville in Washington, the Bob Creek Fire 48 miles northeast of Baker City, and the Pearl Hill Fire 10 miles southeast of Bridgeport, Washington. Bradeen Hill alone is listed with numerous residences threatened, evacuations and road closures in effect, and 3 structures already lost. It appears in this report for the very first time. That is what makes the change column so unnerving once you understand it. The 2,149 people who arrived in Oregon and Washington that day did not arrive to a static problem they could finally get ahead of. They arrived to a region that had generated 15 new fires and 5 new large incidents in the 24 hours it took to get them there. There is a phrase in emergency management for this condition: demand exceeding surge capacity. It is not a dramatic phrase, and it does not appear anywhere in the July 26th report because operational documents do not editorialize. But it is the only accurate summary of what those 2 columns describe. All of that is aggregate. It is the view from 30,000 feet, and at 30,000 feet everything looks like arithmetic. To see what this actually does, what a national resource shortage does to one specific piece of burning ground, you have to come down to a single row in a single table, describing a fire burning 25 miles southwest of a town in eastern Oregon that most Americans have never heard of. But before we go there, I need to show you the fires that got everything they asked for. Because that comparison is the entire point, and I want to say plainly, before we start looking at those numbers, that the comparison is not an indictment of anybody. There is no villain in the next section. There is a rule and there is a shortage, and the two of them together produce something that looks a great deal like a choice, even though nobody ever made one. Part 4. The Priority Ranking. I said earlier that the allocation rule at Preparedness Level 5 is defensible, and I meant it, so let me defend it properly before I show you what it costs. When the national system runs short, resources are ranked by threat. First, threat to human life, then threat to communities and property, then critical infrastructure, the transmission lines, the water systems, the communication repeaters that whole regions depend on, then everything else, which in practice means land. That hierarchy is not arbitrary, and it is not bureaucratic cowardice. It is the accumulated result of a century of learning, some of it learned in the worst possible way, about what happens when fire reaches people. Nobody who has read the after-action reports from the fires that killed civilians would argue for a different ordering. It is also worth saying that the ranking is not applied by an algorithm in a vacuum. It is worked out every day by human beings in coordination centres. The geographic area coordination centres, and above them the National Multi-Agency Coordinating Group in Boise, who sit down with the current list of incidents, the resource inventory, and the weather forecast, and decide who gets what. Those people know exactly what they're doing when they leave a fire unstaffed. They are not unaware of it. They are making a judgment that the alternative is worse, and in almost every individual case they are right. What the July 26th report shows is what happens when that judgment has to be made every single day for a week, with the same answer about the same fires. So when I show you the numbers that follow, I want you to hold two ideas at once, because the honest version of this story requires both. Inside the very same July 26th report, here is what a fire looks like when it wins the priority ranking. The Akawa Butte Fire, managed by an Oregon Department of Forestry Incident Management team, 13 miles northeast of Sisters, Oregon. 26,435 acres, assigned to it 1,567 personnel, 46 crews, 87 engines, 18 helicopters, cost to date $15.5 million. NIFC's description notes extreme fire behavior with spotting, torching and wind-driven runs, numerous structures and critical infrastructure threatened, evacuations and closures in effect. 1,500 people on 26,000 acres. The E. Evans Creek Road Fire, 14 miles northeast of Rogue River, Oregon, 15,580 acres, and shrinking slightly, thanks to more accurate mapping. Assigned, 1,489 personnel, 47 crews, 69 engines, cost to date $50.5 million, $50 million on 15,000 acres, numerous structures and communication infrastructure threatened, the Salmon Fire, on the Umatilla National Forest, 34 miles southwest of Baker City, 1,426 acres, that is not a typo, 1,400 acres, roughly 2 square miles, assigned 866 personnel, 21 crews, 34 engines, cost to date $27 million. The Anthony Fire, 34 miles north of Baker City, 2,514 acres, 372 personnel, $18.3 million, 64% contained. And it is not only the small fires that got what they needed. The Rogue Creek Complex, 2 fires managed together by a Bureau of Land Management team 10 miles south of Fossil, Oregon, is at 199,047 acres, a genuinely enormous fire, within striking distance of big grass in size. It has 1,292 people on it, 148 crews, 36 engines, and it is 31% contained with 3 structures lost. The Hay Creek Complex, 5 separate fires 5 miles west of Condon, Oregon, 168,510 acres, 1,067 personnel, and 50% contained. Half of that perimeter is secured. The Brewer Fire, 15 miles east of Madras, 37,000 acres, 1,055 personnel, 75 engines, 18 helicopters, 18 structures already lost, evacuations in effect. Those 3 fires alone account for more than 400,000 acres and roughly 3,500 people. They are being fought hard by large, well-resourced organizations, and 2 of them are making real progress on containment. So this is not a story about a region that gave up. Oregon and Washington on July 26th are the site of one of the largest firefighting mobilizations in recent American history. 15,000 people, 900 engines, 75 aircraft, 19 incident management teams. That is an extraordinary undertaking, and it is working on a great many of these fires. Now, it would be extremely easy and extremely lazy to look at those figures and start shouting about government waste. $27 million on 1,400 acres, $50 million on 15,000. That reading is exactly backwards, and I want to make sure nobody takes it away from this video. Consider what those dollar figures actually buy. A single Type 1 helicopter costs in the region of tens of thousands of dollars a day just to have on standby before it lifts off. A 20-person hotshot crew costs roughly the same again in wages, per diem, transport and support. Fire camps for 1,000 people require caterers, showers, sanitation, medical units, communications, ground support, and a supply chain that runs on trucks. Retardant is expensive, and air tankers are more expensive. $50 million on a 15,000-acre fire is not somebody being careless with a budget. It is several hundred people for several weeks, with aircraft, in difficult country, near homes. Those fires are small because they were fought. The salmon fire is 1,400 acres and 60% contained after weeks of work by 866 people, in timber, on a national forest, with residences and critical infrastructure in the way. Left alone, in this fuel and this weather, it would not have stayed at 1,400 acres. The $27 million is not the cost of the fire. It is the price of the fire that did not happen. That is what suppression looks like when it works. It looks like an enormous amount of money spent on a piece of ground you will never hear about again, precisely because the money was spent. Which means the comparison I'm about to draw is not an accusation against anyone on those fire lines. Nobody at Akawa Butte or Evans Creek did anything wrong. Every one of those crews was where a rational system put them, doing exactly what the ranking told them to do, and in most cases doing it very well. But every one of those assignments came out of the same finite pool. 1,567 people at Akawa Butte were 1,567 people who were not somewhere else. 1,489 at Evans Creek were not somewhere else. 866 at Salmon were not somewhere else. That is not a criticism, it is a subtraction, and subtraction has to come out of something. So here is the question that the rest of this video answers. If a fire threatens a town, it gets 1,500 people. If it threatens a highway and a transmission line, it gets 800. If it threatens homes, it gets a management team and a state mobilization. What does a fire get when it threatens only land, and it loses that competition, quietly, automatically, every single day, for a week? Part 5. Big Grass. 25 miles southwest of Jordan Valley, Oregon. If you have never heard of Jordan Valley, that is not a failure on your part. It is a small town in Malheur County, in the far southeastern corner of Oregon, close enough to the Idaho line that people there often think of themselves as living in Idaho's orbit rather than Oregon's. The land around it is high desert, sagebrush, bunch grass, rimrock, cattle. Enormous distances between anything and anything else. It is administered largely by the Bureau of Land Management, out of what the agency calls the Vail District. On the July 26th Incident Management Situation Report, in the northwest section, there is a single row for a fire called Big Grass. I'm going to read the entire row, field by field, because I do not want to be accused of picking out the dramatic parts. Total acres, 220,000. Change in acres, plus 171,742. Containment, 5%. Estimated containment date, August 8th. Total personnel, 65. Crews, 0. Engines, 11. Helicopters, 0. Structures lost, 0. Estimated cost to date, $675,000. Let me take those in order, because 2 of them are extraordinary, and one of them is, I think, close to unbelievable. Start with the change figure. 171,742 acres in a single operational period. In the fire world, an operational period is usually a 12-hour shift, and the acreage change in this report is measured from the previous day's report. So we are talking about roughly 1 day. 171,000 acres is 268 square miles. I want to make that land because acreage figures are almost designed to slide off the brain. The city of Chicago covers about 230 square miles. New York City, all 5 boroughs, covers about 300. So this fire burned an area larger than Chicago and approaching the size of New York City between one morning's report and the next. Not over a season, not over a week, between 2 sunrises. That took the fire from roughly 48,000 acres to 220,000 acres. And now the second number, 65 people. 65 human beings are assigned to a fire the size of a major American city. 0 hand crews. And hand crews are the workhorses of wildland firefighting, the 20-person modules that actually cut line. 0 helicopters, which means no aerial water or retardant delivery organic to the incident. No ability to reach a flank that a vehicle cannot get to. 11 engines, 65 people total, and that figure includes everybody. Engine operators, a small overhead group, the people running logistics. For scale, and this is not a rhetorical flourish, it is just the report. The Akawa Butte fire at 26,000 acres has 1,567 people on it. Big Grass is more than 8 times larger and has 1/24 of the staffing. Then the cost line, which quietly confirms everything the staffing line implies. $675,000 spent to date on 220,000 acres. That works out to a little over $3 an acre. At E. Evans Creek Road, $50.5 million across 15,580 acres works out to roughly $3,240 an acre. Same agency reporting system, same state, same morning. A difference of about 1,000-fold in dollars spent per acre of burning ground. Now, before anyone concludes that this fire is being ignored because there is nothing out there to protect, read what NEFC itself wrote in the narrative section about Big Grass. This is verbatim. Big Grass, Vale District, BLM, 25 miles southwest of Jordan Valley, OR, brush and grass. Extreme fire behavior with uphill runs, wind-driven runs and running. Numerous structures and communication infrastructure threatened. Area and road closures in effect. Numerous structures and communication infrastructure threatened. That is the agency's own language, on the same line as the 65 personnel. This is not a fire burning across a void. It is a fire that has structures and communication infrastructure in front of it, and has not reached them yet. Communication infrastructure in that part of the interior west means repeaters and towers on ridgelines. The things that carry emergency dispatch, that carry the radio traffic for the very crews fighting fires in the region, that carry cell service for ranches that have no other connection to the outside world. In remote country, losing a repeater is not an inconvenience. It is the loss of the ability to call for help. So why 65 people? Because there are not 6,500 people to send. Because every hand crew in the geographic area is already committed. Because when the national ranking sorts by threat to life and property, a fire burning across sparsely populated BLM rangeland sorts, below a fire burning toward Sisters, and it sorts below a fire burning toward Rogue River, and it sorts below a fire on the Colville Reservation that we're going to spend a long time with later, and it sorts below them again the next day, and again the day after. Nobody made a decision to abandon Big Grass. That is the thing to understand. There was never a meeting. There is just a ranking, and a fire that is at the bottom of it, every day, while it grows. I want to spend one more minute on that 0 in the crews column, because it is the field in this row that a firefighter would notice first, and its significance is not obvious from outside the profession. A crew, in this context, usually means a 20-person hand crew. They are the people who actually build fire line, who walk the edge of a fire with chainsaws and hand tools and cut a strip down to mineral soil, in terrain no vehicle can reach, for 12 or 14 hours at a stretch. Engines are useful and often essential, but an engine is bound to a road or to ground it can drive on, and it is bound to its water supply. On a fire in rolling high desert with a perimeter that is now measured in the hundreds of miles, engines can protect specific points. They cannot encircle anything. 0 crews means that nobody is building line on Big Grass. Not slowly, not partially. The 5% containment figure in that row almost certainly reflects natural barriers, existing roads and burned-out ground rather than constructed line. 0 helicopters compounds it. Helicopters do two things on a fire like this. They drop water and retardant on flanks that ground resources cannot reach, and, often more importantly, they move people. Without rotary wing support, every person on that fire is limited to where a truck can take them. 65 people, 11 engines, no crews, no aircraft, on a perimeter enclosing an area larger than Chicago. Big grass is what Preparedness Level 5 looks like from the bottom of the list. And there is one more problem with this fire, which is that we do not actually know how big it is. Because on the morning of July 26th, the National Interagency Fire Center published two different numbers for it. Part 6. The number that disagrees with itself. The Incident Management Situation Report, timestamped 7:30 in the morning, Mountain Daylight Time on July 26th, lists the Big Grass Fire at 220,000 acres. Other federal feeds, drawing on NIFC's own live incident database, the system the agency calls WFIGS, list the Big Grass Fire on that same day at 280,000 acres, 5% contained, with a discovery date of July 23rd. Same agency, same morning, same fire, a 60,000 acre disagreement. 60,000 acres is not a rounding error. 60,000 acres is larger than most wildfires that make the national news in an average year. It is roughly 94 square miles of uncertainty about where the edge of a fire is, and I want to handle this carefully, because this is exactly the kind of thing that, presented the wrong way, turns into a very bad conclusion. So let me first tell you what causes it, and then, later in this video, I will tell you what people are saying it means, and which part of that is actually right. Here is the mundane explanation, and it is entirely public. Wildfire acreage is not a measurement. It is an estimate of the total area enclosed within the fire's perimeter, and note that word, enclosed, because it includes unburned islands inside the line, as well as blackened ground. That perimeter gets established three ways. Crews on the ground walk sections of it with GPS. Aircraft fly infrared mapping missions, usually at night, when the thermal contrast between burned and unburned ground is sharpest, and the aircraft can see through smoke, and satellites detect thermal anomalies from orbit. All three of those methods take time, and all three of them produce a picture of where the fire was, not where it is. On a fire that is creeping, the lag does not matter much. On a fire that is running 20 miles in an afternoon, the lag is the entire story. The reporting cadence compounds it. Incident agencies typically update figures once or twice a day, usually in the morning, after the overnight infrared flight has been processed, which means that a fire that makes a major run at 3 in the afternoon does not appear in the official numbers until the following dawn, and by then it has had another night and part of a morning to move. So the two numbers are not a contradiction. They are two snapshots taken by two systems with two different refresh clocks of an object that is moving faster than either of them. The honest way to say this on camera, and the way I am going to say it for the rest of this video, is the Big Grass Fire is reported at between 220,000 and 280,000 acres at roughly 5% containment as of July 26, 2026, and it grew by more than 170,000 acres in a single day. Now hold on to that discovery date because it does something to the arithmetic. July 23rd. If Big Grass was discovered on July 23rd and is somewhere between 220 and 280,000 acres on July 26th, then this fire went from a single ignition to 250,000 acres in roughly 72 hours, 3 days, 268 square miles of that in one of them. Let me put that against something we covered on this channel earlier this month, because the comparison is the fastest way to feel the scale. Back on the 9th of July, I made a video about the wildfire outbreak across the interior West, and the headline fire in that video, the largest active wildfire in the United States at that moment, was the Babylon Fire in Utah, at about 101,000 acres. At the time, that was a genuinely remarkable number. It was the first fire over 100,000 acres in Utah in something like 8 years. Big Grass passed the Babylon Fire's entire final footprint in a single afternoon. And here is the other half of that comparison, which is the more instructive half. Look up the Babylon Fire in the July 26th report. It is still there. 107,189 acres. It grew about 6,000 acres in 2.5 weeks. And it is 95% contained, with a Great Basin Incident Management Team handing command back to the local unit. 95% contained. 264 people still on it, $60.3 million spent. That is what a fire looks like when it is fought from the beginning. It grows 6,000 acres in 17 days and ends up in a mop-up phase with a defined perimeter. Big Grass grew 171,000 acres in one day and has 65 people on it. Same country, same week, same agency. The difference is not the fire, the difference is who was available, and Big Grass was not alone in exploding that night. Look down the Oregon rows in the same report, and you find a cluster of fires that all made enormous runs in the same operational period, in the same corner of the state, under the same wind. The Hat Fire on the Vail District 40 miles east of Burns, 20,000 acres, having grown 16,500 of them in a day, 10% contained, with 21 people and 6 engines assigned. The Fox Fire, 12 miles northeast of Huntington, 7,098 acres, of which 6,898 came in a single day, 0% contained, 94 personnel. NEFC's description reads extreme fire behavior with uphill runs, running and long-range spotting. Numerous residences and communication infrastructure threatened. The second flat fire on the Burns District 6 miles northeast of Riley, 25,188 acres, 19,188 of them in a day, 5% contained. Jackass Butte, 40 miles south of Burns, 11,396 acres, 10,396 in a day, 48 people. Bald Mountain, 50 miles southeast of Burns, 8,981 acres, 8,831 in a day, 1% contained, 40 people, and the Arifas 7 Shingle Fire, 14 miles southeast of Mitchell, 30,000 acres, 22,000 of them in a day, 0% contained, with structures threatened and evacuations in effect. Add those single-day growth figures together with Big Grass, and you get something in the neighborhood of 255,000 acres of new fire in southeastern and central Oregon in one operational period. That is the context the 60,000-acre reporting discrepancy sits inside. The mapping system is not merely trying to keep up with one runaway fire. It is trying to keep up with an entire quadrant of a state going up at once. So the number is not being hidden from you. I want to be extremely direct about that because we're going to revisit it later. The number is being outrun. Those are very different problems, and only one of them has a villain. But none of what I have told you so far actually explains the speed. A shortage of firefighters explains why a fire is not stopped. It does not explain how a fire covers 268 square miles between one sunrise and the next. For that, you have to look at what is actually burning out there, and it is almost certainly not what you are picturing. Part 7. The fuel nobody is afraid of. Close your eyes for a second and picture a Pacific Northwest wildfire. I would bet almost anything on what you just saw. A wall of orange flame in dense evergreen forest. 200-foot Douglas fir going up like matches. Crown fire moving through old growth, embers streaming off a ridgeline, a column of smoke 20,000 feet high. That is the image. It is on every news broadcast, every documentary, every stock photo library. Now look at what NFC lists as the fuel type for the two largest fires in this report. For the Kaiser Canyon fire in Washington, the incident's primary fuel is recorded as tall grass, averaging 2.5 feet in height. For Big Grass, and the name is not a coincidence, the fuel is listed as brush and grass. Grass, not old growth, not timber. Grass about knee to waist high, cured brown by 2 months without meaningful rain. That inversion is, I think, the most underexplained thing in American fire coverage, and it is the mechanism that makes the numbers in this video possible. So let me walk through it properly, because once you see it, the 268 square mile day stops being mysterious and becomes something much more unsettling, which is arithmetic. Start with energy. A stand of mature timber holds vastly more energy per acre than a field of cured grass. Orders of magnitude more. If you burn an acre of forest completely, you release far more heat than you would from an acre of grassland. On that measure, timber is the dangerous fuel and grass is trivial. But total energy is not what determines how fast a fire travels. What determines that is how quickly a given piece of fuel goes from unburned to fully involved once the flame front reaches it. And a tree is slow. Before a live conifer burns, it has to be preheated. The radiant and convective energy from the approaching fire has to drive moisture out of the needles and the fine branches. That takes time, seconds to minutes, depending on the tree and its moisture content. Then the fine fuels ignite, then they carry to heavier branches. Then, if conditions allow, the fire climbs into the crown. Every one of those steps is a delay, and delay is exactly what a fire crew fights with. Delay is why line construction works at all. You're betting that you can cut a gap in the fuel faster than the fire can process its way toward you. Now take that same flame front and put it into cured grass at 8% relative humidity. There is no preheating stage worth the name. A dead grass stem at single-digit fuel moisture is essentially tinder. It ignites on contact with flame or with a landing ember, and it is completely consumed in a matter of seconds. There is no ladder to climb, no moisture to drive off, no dense woody mass that has to be brought up to combustion temperature. The fuel is fine, it is dead, it is dry, and it is continuous across the ground for miles. The consequence is that in fine fuels the rate of spread does not track the energy in the fuel, it tracks the wind. The flame front moves at a substantial fraction of the wind speed at flame height, because the fire is essentially being blown across a surface of instantly available fuel. Every ember that lands ahead of the front starts a new front. Every gust extends the reach. So now plug in the actual forecast. Here is the NIFC Predictive Services discussion from the July 26th report, word for word. Widespread elevated to critical conditions will develop again today across the inland northwest into the northern Rockies and northwestern Great Basin today, from westerly winds 15 to 25 miles per hour, with gusts 25 to 35 miles per hour, amid relative humidity of 5 to 20%. 15 to 25 gusting 35, humidity down to 5%, and I want to flag one word in that paragraph because it is doing a lot of quiet work. Again, widespread elevated to critical conditions will develop again today. This is not a one-day wind event that caught the region off guard. This is a pattern that has been rearming an already burning landscape every afternoon, day after day, and the forecast says it will keep doing it. Put the mechanism and the forecast together, and the arithmetic resolves itself. A continuous bed of cured fine fuel under sustained 20-mile-an-hour winds with 35-mile-an-hour gusts, at 5 to 20% humidity, in rolling high desert with no natural barriers for tens of miles, can push a flame front an extraordinary distance in a single burning period. 48,000 acres to 220,000 acres between two morning reports is not a mystery, and it is not an anomaly of physics. It is multiplication. There is a second-order effect worth understanding here too, because it is what defeats the engines. Spotting. When a fire is running hard, it lofts burning material or grass fragments, bark, small branches into the convection column above the flame front. That material is carried downwind and falls out ahead of the fire. Every one of those embers that lands in receptive fuel starts a new fire. In heavy timber, spotting distances are often measured in hundreds of yards to a mile or two. In wind-driven fine fuels, the distances are usually shorter, but the frequency is enormous, and the fuel it lands in is instantly receptive. What that produces is a fire front that is not really a line at all. It is a broad, ragged, advancing zone of hundreds of simultaneous ignitions, constantly seeding itself forward. You cannot hold a line against that with 11 engines. The fire simply appears behind you, and you can see the same fuel physics playing out on smaller fires in the same report, which is a useful check that this is a general mechanism rather than a one-fire oddity. The railroad fire, run by the Washington State Fire Marshal's Office 9 miles north of Mattawa. Grass and brush, 8,380 acres, nearly 3,000 of them added in a day, 7 structures lost. The Signal Peak fire on the Acama Agency lands, 1 mile south of White Swan, Washington. Grass and brush, 3,000 acres, 2,500 of them in a single day, 0% contained, with wind-driven runs and spotting. 2,500 acres in a day, on a fire nobody outside the Yakima Valley has heard of, in knee-high grass. Which brings me to the part of this that I find genuinely uncomfortable, because it is a case of a completely reasonable assumption quietly becoming false. Historically, grass fires have been treated as lower priority than timber fires. There are good reasons for that. Grass fires burn out quickly. They do not throw the long-range embers that timber crown fires do. They are easier to attack directly with engines and dozers because you can drive on the ground they burn. They generally threaten less because grassland tends to be less densely populated than forest. Above all, they were small. Every part of that reasoning holds, right up until the fuel bed becomes continuous across hundreds of square miles. The humidity drops to 5%, the wind blows for a week, and there is nobody available to attack it on day one. A 220,000-acre grass fire with 65 people on it is what happens when a reasonable assumption stops being true, and the doctrine built on it has not caught up. And if that sounds like the worst case in this report, it is not, because at least 4 fires in Oregon and Washington on July 26th have nobody on them at all. Part 8. The fires with nobody on them. I want to read you 4 rows from the same table. The Grasshopper Fire, Mount Hood National Forest, 7 miles west of Waymick, Oregon. 3,500 acres, 0% contained, estimated containment date, October 1st. Personnel assigned, 0. Now here is what the National Interagency Fire Center wrote in its own narrative about that fire in the same document, verbatim. Grasshopper, Mount Hood and F, USFS. 7 miles west of Waymick, OR. Timber and brush. Extreme fire behavior with group torching, wind-driven runs and spotting. Numerous residences threatened. Evacuations in effect. Read that again alongside the staffing figure. Extreme fire behavior, group torching, which means clusters of trees igniting entirely, crown to base. Wind-driven runs. Spotting, which means the fire is throwing embers ahead of itself and starting new fires downwind. Numerous residences threatened. Evacuations in effect, meaning people have been told to leave their homes right now because of this fire, and the personnel column reads 0. That is not a fire being monitored from a distance as a management decision. Border 2, in North Cascades National Park, 36 miles northeast of Marble Mount, Washington, 325 acres, 0% contained, structures threatened, 0 personnel, estimated containment date November 1st. Luna, also in North Cascades, 10 miles north of New Harlem, 125 acres, 0% contained, structures threatened, 0 personnel, estimated containment date November 30th. Olive Butte, on the Wallowa, Whitman National Forest 34 miles southwest of Baker City, 3,029 acres, 60% contained, residences and critical infrastructure threatened, evacuations and closures in effect, and 0 personnel assigned, with an estimated containment date of October 30th. And then there is Ptarmigan on the Okanagan-Wenatchee National Forest, 25 miles northwest of Mazama, Washington. 2,500 acres, having grown 900 acres in a day. 0% contained. Structures threatened. NIFC's description. Extreme fire behavior with uphill runs, crowning and spotting. 4 people. 4. On a fire that is crowning, growing 900 acres a day and threatening structures. I want to be fair about what some of these zeros mean, because there is a legitimate category here that is not simply abandonment. In wilderness areas and national parks, some fires genuinely are managed for resource benefit rather than suppressed, allowed to burn under monitoring because fire is a natural process in those systems and excluding it causes long-term harm. Border 2 and Luna, deep in North Cascades National Park, may partly fall into that category. That is a real and defensible practice. But look at the containment dates, because those tell you what the incident teams actually expect. October 1st, November 1st, November 30th. An estimated containment date of November 30th on a fire in the North Cascades is not a suppression plan, it is a weather forecast. What that date encodes is a professional judgment that this fire ends when the season changes, when the autumn rains arrive and the snowline drops, and not before, and not because of anything anyone does to it. The incident team is filing paperwork that says, in effect, we will be managing this into the winter, and Grasshopper is not in a wilderness area with a resource benefit rationale. Grasshopper has evacuations in effect. 7 miles west of Waymick, Oregon, there are people who have been told to leave their houses because of a fire, and the federal government's own morning report shows nobody assigned to it. I have thought a lot about how to say the next part because I do not want to be glib about it. If you live near Waymick and you have evacuated, and you look up the official federal situation report for the fire that made you leave your home, and the personnel column reads 0, you are going to conclude that nobody is coming. And at the level of your actual lived experience, on that day, that conclusion is correct. It is not correct as a description of intent. Nobody in Boise or Portland decided your house did not matter. There is no meeting where that happened. What there is a national priority ranking applied to a pool of people that ran out, on a morning when 96% of the country's available surge went to fires that were even closer to even more people. The gap between nobody decided to abandon you and nobody is coming is where this entire story lives, and it is the gap that people fill with theories, which we will get to. There is one more entry in the Washington Rose that shows the same pattern in a slightly different form, and it might be the most quietly alarming line in the whole document. The Little Giant Fire on the Okanogan-Wenatchee National Forest, 30 miles northwest of Leavenworth, Washington. 19,134 acres, and 8,806 of those acres arrived in a single day. 0% contained. Estimated containment date, October 1st. Personnel assigned, 133, 1 crew, 2 engines. NIFC's own description of that fire reads, extreme fire behavior with uphill runs, crowning and long-range spotting. Structures threatened. Long-range spotting, crowning, nearly doubling in a day, in timber, in the Cascades, with 1 hand crew, and the incident commander running it is not even dedicated to it. The report notes that the California team assigned to Little Giant is also managing the Dirty Face incident. That is normal practice at capacity. Teams routinely take on multiple fires, but it tells you something about the depth of the bench that a team is being asked to run a 19,000-acre crowning fire and a second incident at the same time. Across the northwest section of that report, I counted the pattern again and again. Big fires with big organizations, which is what should happen, and then, tucked between them, a series of fires with extreme behavior descriptions and staffing figures in the double digits, single digits, or 0. But first, I want to show you the other side of it, because there is one fire in this report that did get everything: a full incident management team, 764 people, a state fire mobilization, $12.5 million, and I want you to see what it cost anyway. It is burning 110,000 acres in north-central Washington, on land that has already been taken from the people living on it once before. Before we go north, though, one final observation about the zeros, because I think it reframes everything in this act. We have spent the last hour treating unstaffed fires as the failure state. They are not. Quite. The failure state is what those fires become later. A fire with nobody on it does not stay a fire with nobody on it forever. It stays unstaffed for exactly as long as it threatens nothing that outranks the other fires on the list. The moment it reaches a highway, a town, a transmission corridor, a communication site, the moment it acquires a threat to life or property, it moves up the ranking and it gets people. But it arrives at that moment as a completely different fire than it would have been. Grasshopper at 3,500 acres with a crew on it on day 1 is a manageable problem. Grasshopper at 40,000 acres 3 weeks later, running into the residential fringe west of Wamek, is not the same problem at all. Big Grass at 48,000 acres was something 11 engines and a couple of hand crews could have worked with. Big Grass at 280,000 acres, if the wind turns it toward those threatened structures and that communication infrastructure, is going to require an army that will have to come from somewhere else, which means from another fire. That is the emergent behavior nobody designed. The priority ranking does not eliminate the work on the deprioritized fires, it defers it at interest. Part 9, 1 mile south of Nespelem. At about 4 minutes past 6 in the morning on the 16th of July, 2026, lightning struck the ground roughly 1 mile south of a town called Nespelem in north-central Washington on the Colville Indian Reservation. There is a woman named Dee Gunshows who watched it happen. She's a Colville Tribes elder, and she was the first female police officer the Colville Tribes ever had. And what she said afterward about that storm is, I think, the most technically precise description of a fire's ignition that I have read from anyone outside the profession. I could see where the trees were getting hit, she said, and I told my son-in-law it takes 24 to 40 hours for the lightning to go all the way to the root, and once it starts coming up, it's just going to explode. And that's what happened. What she's describing there has a name in fire science. It is called a holdover, or sometimes a sleeper fire. When lightning strikes a tree, the current does not simply flash across the bark and dissipate. It can follow moisture channels down through the trunk and into the root system, depositing energy into duff and root material below the surface, where there is fuel and just enough oxygen to smoulder. That smouldering can persist for hours or days, entirely invisible, producing no flame and often no visible smoke, before it works back up to the surface, finds fine fuels and open air, and becomes a fire. Fire managers across the West spend a significant amount of energy on exactly this problem. After a lightning event, they will fly detection patterns for days afterward, looking for the strikes that have not shown themselves yet. It is one of the reasons a dry thunderstorm is so dangerous, not just for what it starts immediately, but for what it leaves buried. D-gun shows called it before it surfaced, and then it surfaced. The cause listed in the federal record for this fire is a single word: natural. That is the National Interagency Fire Center's classification, entered by the incident agency after investigation. No accelerant, no equipment, no campfire, no power line. Lightning, into a landscape that had been curing for 2 months, and it was not an isolated strike. In the same window across north-central Washington, lightning was starting fires faster than anyone could count them. Regional reporting from the Methau Ranger District, one small piece of one national forest, documented 6 new fires from a single lightning event. That is one district. The strikes were falling across a region the size of several eastern states. Hold that fact, because it is going to matter enormously in about 40 minutes when we get to what people are saying about how all of this started. Here is what the fire did next, read as a ladder from the federal daily reporting. On July 16th, the day it started, it was estimated at about 2,200 acres. By July 19th, 38,225 acres, 0% contained. July 20th, 60,226, 0% contained. July 21st, 62,873, still 0. July 22nd, 71,150, 1% contained. July 23rd, 79,642, 3%. July 24th, 89,259, 3%. July 25th, 106,935, 13%. July 26th, 110,355 acres, 12% contained. Go back over those last 2 lines because there is something in them that looks like an error and is not. On July 25th, the fire was 13% contained. On July 26th, it was 12% contained. The containment number went backwards, and on the same day it went backwards, the fire gained 3,420 acres. That is not a mistake in the data, and it is not somebody moving the goalposts. Containment is expressed as a percentage of the fire's perimeter that has been secured, where crews have built and are holding line, or where the fire has run into a road, a river, a rock face, or previously burned ground that will stop it. It is a ratio. It has a numerator and a denominator. When the fire grows, the denominator grows. If crews secure 2 miles of line overnight, but the fire adds 3 miles of new perimeter, the crews have unambiguously gained ground in absolute terms, and the percentage still falls. A falling containment number on a growing fire is one of the clearest signals in wildland firefighting that the perimeter is outrunning line construction. It means the people on that fire are working and losing. And look at the shape of that whole ladder again, because it tells a story about the first 4 days that nothing else in the report does. 2,200 acres on the day of ignition, 38,000 by the 19th, 60,000 by the 20th. 0% contained through all of it, and still at 0 on the 21st, 5 full days after the strike. 5 days at 0 containment on a fire that had already reached 60,000 acres. Then 1%, then 3, then 3 again. The first meaningful jump does not arrive until July 25th, when containment goes from 3% to 13, 9 days in. That is roughly when the personnel figure climbs past 700, and the complex incident management team has had time to establish an organisation, build a plan, and put line in the ground. What that curve shows you is how long it takes to spin up a full response, even for a fire that is winning the priority ranking. 9 days from ignition to double-digit containment. 9 days in which the fire went from 2,000 acres to over 100,000. And here is the thing about Kaiser Canyon that makes it the hinge of this entire video. This fire got resources. 764 personnel, 17 crews, 40 engines, 2 helicopters, a complex incident management team, Northern Rockies. Team 2, $12.6 million spent to date, Washington State Fire Mobilization authorized, which is the mechanism by which the state directs firefighting resources from around Washington to an incident that has exceeded local capacity. Compare that to Big Grass. 65 people, 0 crews, 0 helicopters. Kaiser Canyon has more than 11 times the personnel on roughly half the acreage. That is the ranking working exactly as designed. Kaiser Canyon is burning around a town. Big Grass is burning around sagebrush. The system did what it is supposed to do. NIFC's operational description of Kaiser Canyon on July 26 reads, "Extreme fire behavior with short crown runs, wind-driven runs, and short-range spotting. Numerous structures threatened. Evacuations, area and road closures in effect." More than 1,000 people were displaced from their homes by a Level 3 evacuation order, which in Washington's system means go now, not consider leaving, not be ready. Go. An evacuation shelter was opened at Lake Roosevelt High School. For scale, the Colville Indian Reservation covers about 1.4 million acres. Nespelem is one of its 8 primary towns. So this is the version of the story where everything worked. A full incident management team arrived. The state mobilized. 764 people went to work. $12.5 million was committed. And I want you to hold that in your mind for the next 20 minutes because I am about to tell you what the fire took anyway. Part 10. 45 structures, 12 homes, 120 sites. The July 26th report has a column near the right-hand edge of the table labelled, in the compressed shorthand of the document, "Struck Lost." For Kaiser Canyon, that column reads 45. That is the highest structure loss figure of any incident in the entire northwest section of the report. Not the largest fire. Big Grass and the Roe Creek complex are both larger, the most destructive. For context inside the same report, the Brewer Fire lost 18 structures. The Modrite Fire, on Washington Department of Natural Resources land 70 miles southwest of Inchelium, lost 15. The Hay Creek complex lost 11. The Railroad Fire and the E. Evans Creek Road Fire lost 7 each. Add up the structure loss column across the northwest incidents in that one report, and you get at least 106 buildings gone. 45 of them are on the Colville Reservation. Now, the Confederated Tribes of the Colville Reservation confirmed a different number in their own reporting: 12 homes destroyed. I want to handle that discrepancy carefully rather than simply reaching for the larger figure, because the difference between the two numbers is not a dispute, it is a definition. Structures, in federal wildfire reporting, is a broad category. It includes primary residences, but it also includes outbuildings, sheds, barns, garages, workshops, pump houses, equipment storage. On rural land, a single-family property might account for 4 or 5 entries in that column. So the honest construction, the one I'm going to use, and the one you should use if you talk about this, is that at least 12 homes were destroyed, and the federal count of total structures lost stands at 45. Do not say 45 homes. 12 families lost the house they lived in, and a great deal more than 12 families lost buildings that mattered to them. And then there is a number that the July 26th report has no column for at all, because the reporting system was never built to count it. Approximately 120 archaeological sites on the Colville Reservation have been burned over. I want to be specific about what that phrase covers, because archaeological site makes most people picture a dig. A roped-off square of ground, something under study by academics. That is not what this is. These are culturally modified trees, living trees carrying carvings made by people, some of them generations old. These are paintings on rock, in place, on the stone they were made on. These are locations that hold meaning inside a religious and cultural tradition that is still practiced by people who are still there, who can walk to them. They are not artifacts in a museum in another city. They are marks left on living things and on standing stone by ancestors in the place where the descendants still live. 120 of them burned over. And I want to be honest about what burned over does and does not mean, because it is not always total destruction, and it would be wrong to imply that it is. A rock painting may survive a fast-moving grass fire, and it may not. heat can spool the stone surface, and smoke residue can obscure pigment. A culturally modified tree that has carried a carving for a century has a specific vulnerability. The carving is in the living cambium layer, and the tree does not have to be consumed for the mark to be lost. Some of these sites will be assessed and found intact, others will not. What is certain is that the assessment itself will take years, that it has to be done by people who know what they are looking at, and that the ones that are gone in a way that no amount of money fixes. You can rebuild a house. There is no procedure for rebuilding a tree that somebody's great-grandfather carved. That is the category of loss that the structure column was never designed to hold. Here is Dee Gunshows again on what she thinks the loss means. "Something happened to Mother Earth," she said. "She's getting mad because somebody's doing something to our land that we shouldn't be doing. We need to start taking better care of her, because if it wasn't for her, nobody would be here. She's our air. She's our water." Her own losses are specific and they are total. She lost her home in Nespelem. She lost 2 cars and a recreational vehicle. And when the fire started, she was trapped in town for 2 days, watching the flames get bigger and closer, without food or water prepared, with road closures blocking her from leaving. At the Red Cross shelter, she put the situation into a sentence that I have not been able to stop thinking about. "It's really hard for me now because they're saying, 'Maybe you can go home in 2 days,' and I'm like, where? Where am I going to go? I have nothing." And then this, which is about something other than property. "I've always been the helper. I've always helped other people, and then I felt like a failure because at the time I couldn't even help myself." Her daughter, Alicia Gunshows, who lost a car and a recreational vehicle of her own, said something almost identical without having heard her mother say it. "The saddest part is we've always been that family that always helped others. You know, we always gathered stuff to help others, and that for this to happen, and I was like telling my mum, I don't know how to ask for help." Someone at the shelter gave Dee a bag of donated yarn. She crochets gifts for people during hard times, and the yarn she had kept, saved from her deceased mother and her deceased sister, had burned with the house. When she was handed the replacement, she cried. "For somebody to come and bring this," she said, holding the bag. "That's why I cried, because I know somebody out there cares. I want to bring this back to where we started, because it is the same problem one scale down. The acreage column on July 26th captured 110,355. The structures column captured 45. Between the two of them, they are a complete account of this fire according to the system that reports on it. And between the two of them, they captured essentially nothing of what I just described. There is no column for 120 archaeological sites. There is no column for a woman who has been the person other people lean on for her entire life, sitting in a high school parking lot, unable to answer the question of where she's going to sleep. There is no column for yarn. That is the same measurement failure this whole video has been circling. At the national level, the report can tell you that the Northwest has 15,110 people and 1.1 million acres, and it cannot tell you that a fire in Malheur County has 65 people because there is nobody left. At the incident level, it can tell you 45 structures, and it cannot tell you what burned. And I have not told you the worst of it yet. Part 11. The cemetery, the church, and the canyon that burned twice. The fire burned through the Nespelem cemetery. Firefighters tried to stop it. They attempted to cut a line around the cemetery specifically, to hold that ground. The fire went through anyway. Many of the graves and headstones were charred, melted or otherwise damaged. Dee Gunshow's mother is buried there. So is her sister. So is her son. So are her aunts and her uncles. She lost her house. And then she lost the place she goes to visit the people she's already lost. And roughly a mile away, off a road called Charlie Williams Road, the Indian Shaker Church at Nespelem burned to the ground. I want to tell you what that building was, because if you do not know the tradition, a church burned registers as a category of loss you have already filed away, and this one does not fit the category. The Indian Shaker Church is a syncretic religious tradition, a genuine fusion of native spiritual practice and Christianity, founded in 1881 by a man named John Slocum, a member of the Squaxin Band who lived near Olympia, Washington. It is not a branch of the Shakers of the American Northeast. It is an entirely separate and independently founded faith, born on this coast, among these peoples, at a moment in the 1880s when native religious practice was under direct and deliberate suppression by the federal government. The Nespelem Church was officially incorporated in the 1930s. It was built by two brothers, by hand, out of logs. At its height, the Nespelem congregation had 35 members. By this summer, it had three people in a hand-built log church carrying a tradition founded in 1881. Marianne Charlie is 70 years old. She's the minister of the Shaker Church in Mallot, and she travels to Nespelem to pray. She began attending church with her parents more than 6 decades ago. I cried when I found out, she said. And then she said something that I think is the single most quietly devastating line in all of the reporting on this fire. I pray with people on the phone. I still have my altar here in my house. It's sad when you don't have a place to go home to, and now I got to pray that much harder when I do. She was also asked about what she was raised to understand about the land, and her answer was this. When I was growing up with my mother and father, they would always explain what the dirt meant that we walked on. When we stand under a tree, there's your shade. When you walk out, there's the sun. When it's night time, there is the moon. It belonged to Mother Earth. Outside the shelter at Lake Roosevelt High School, a 61-year-old tribal elder who gave his name only as Junior sat at a picnic table under smoky skies and wept without making any sound. He declined to give his surname, and he kept his sunglasses on for photographs, because he was taught by his elders that a photograph takes a piece of a person's soul. Junior practices the 7-drum religion, also known as Washat. It holds that human beings must honour the link between the natural world and their own species through singing, drumming, dancing and ritual. Salmon, huckleberries and water are treated as sacraments. Mother Earth is sacred. The heritage of his people and their graves lie around Omak and Nespelem, some of them burned. It's our homeland, he said. And on how he's coping. That's what's helping me to get through this. I pray when I go to sleep. His grandmother, Isabel Arcasa, lived to be 102 years old. She was alive when Chief Joseph lived on this reservation. Junior had recently reconnected with her through a painting of her and other elders that hangs in the gymnasium of Lake Roosevelt High School, the same gymnasium that is now an evacuation shelter. His cousin, 26-year-old Ryan Moon, sitting on the grass beside him, put it more simply. We can't leave home. We will never leave home. Tribal land is sacred. It's sad to see it burned, all gone. Now I want to give you the detail that turns all of this from a tragedy into something structural, something that tells you about the future rather than only about this week. A few months before the Kaiser Canyon fire started, the Colville tribes had begun slowly reseeding Kaiser Canyon. They were reseeding it because a wildfire had burned that same ground less than a year earlier. The new growth was nowhere near the size of the old trees, the ones D. Gun Shows describes as the grandpas and grandmas. It was young, it was low, it was the beginning of a recovery that would have taken decades. It burned again in July, the same canyon, twice, inside 12 months. And that pattern, burning ground that has already burned recently, is one of the best documented feedback loops in the interior West, and it is worth understanding because it is the reason this problem compounds rather than resolving. In sagebrush steppe and grassland systems, fire removes the native perennial bunch grasses and the shrubs. Those natives are slow to re-establish. A mature sagebrush stand can take decades. Into that opened ground come invasive annual grasses, cheatgrass being the most notorious across the Great Basin and the interior northwest. Annual grasses germinate fast, grow fast, set seed and die, and once dead they cure earlier in the season and more completely than the perennials they replaced. The result is a fuel bed that is more continuous, drier earlier in the year, and more readily ignited than what was there before, which means the ground burns again sooner, which removes more of the surviving natives, which opens more ground to the annuals. Ecologists describe this as a shortened fire return interval, landscapes that historically burned every several decades now burning every few years. I want to be careful here, because I'm describing a general and well-supported mechanism, not a studied finding about this specific canyon. Nobody has published an ecological study of Kaiser Canyon's fuel composition, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise. What I can tell you is that the pattern the Colville tribes just experienced, reseed a burn scar, watch it burn again within a year, is exactly the pattern that feedback produces, and it is happening across an enormous area of the interior West, which means the 2.5-foot tall grass that NIFC lists as the primary fuel on this fire may itself be a product of the last fire. I do not want to leave this section entirely in the dark, so here is the one piece of good news out of Nespelem, and it is a real one. Chief Joseph's final resting place, the historic Nez Perce Cemetery near Nespelem, where the leader of the Wallowa band of the Nez Perce is buried after the long, terrible end of his people's flight in 1877, went unscathed. The fire did not reach it. Now hold everything you have just heard against the numbers from the first half of this video. 764 people, 17 crews, 40 engines, a full incident management team, a state fire mobilization, $12.5 million. That is what a fire looks like when the system prioritizes it. And it still took 45 structures, a cemetery, a church founded in 1881, and 120 places that cannot be rebuilt by anyone, ever. Now think about Grasshopper, with evacuations in effect and 0 people assigned. Think about Big Grass, with communication infrastructure in front of it and 65. We have been talking about acreage and staffing tables for an hour, and this is what those tables actually resolve into on the ground. But there is one more thing these fires do, and it does not respect the personnel column, or the containment percentage, or the county line, or the state boundary. It travels hundreds of miles, it arrives at night, and it reaches millions of people who will never see a flame. Part 12. The Smoke That Comes Down at Night. Here is the reason this story concerns you even if you live 2,000 miles from Nespelem. A fire that nobody is fighting still produces smoke, and smoke does not check the personnel column before it travels. We covered the physics of long-range smoke transport in detail on this channel earlier this month, in the video about the cross-border smoke event when Toronto ranked as the worst major city on Earth for air quality, so I'm not going to reteach it. What I want to do instead is show you a specific mechanism that we did not cover then, because it is the one that governs what is happening in eastern Washington right now, and it is genuinely counterintuitive. But first I want to introduce you to a source, because it deserves to be named properly. There is a website called the Washington Smoke Blog. The name makes it sound like somebody's hobby project. It is not. It is a formal partnership between the Washington Department of Ecology, the Washington Department of Health, the Washington Department of Natural Resources, the United States Forest Service, county health departments across the state, local clean air agencies, and tribes. When smoke season starts, air resource advisors and state meteorologists post daily assessments there. It is one of the best pieces of public science communication produced by any state government in the country, and almost nobody outside the Pacific Northwest knows it exists. On July 24th, Nathan Santo Domingo of the Washington Department of Natural Resources posted the assessment for the weekend. Here is how it opens. Fires across the region continue to burn actively as areas east of the Cascades remain in a hot, dry and windy weather pattern. With increasing winds, air quality will likely improve in some areas during the day, but poor air quality will continue downstream of active fires and during the overnight hours. Air quality alerts have been extended until at least Monday morning for several counties in central and eastern Washington. Read that middle sentence again and notice the strange shape of it. Air quality will improve during the day. Poor air quality will continue during the overnight hours. That is backwards from what most people assume. The intuition is that a fire burns hardest in the afternoon, so the smoke must be worst in the afternoon. And in terms of production, that is true. But in terms of what you actually breathe at ground level, the afternoon is often the best part of the day, and the middle of the night is the worst. Here is why. During the day, the sun heats the ground heats the air above it, and that warm air rises. The atmosphere near the surface becomes unstable and turbulent, and that turbulence mixes vertically through what meteorologists call the boundary layer, often a mile or two deep by mid-afternoon. A smoke plume injected into that layer gets diluted through an enormous volume of air. On top of that, the fire's own heat generates a convection column that can loft smoke thousands of feet up, above the layer people are breathing in entirely. Then the sun goes down. The ground cools by radiating heat to space, and it cools faster than the air above it. Within an hour or two you have cold, dense air sitting at the surface with warmer air above it, a temperature inversion. That configuration is extremely stable. Vertical mixing essentially stops. The lid closes, and the smoke that was being carried aloft all afternoon now has nowhere to go but down and sideways. In terrain, cold dense air behaves like a fluid. It flows downhill, It follows drainages. It pools in valley bottoms, and it sits there until the sun comes back and breaks the inversion, which is precisely why the July 24th forecast reads the way it does. Near the Kaiser Canyon fire, the assessment was that increasing southwesterly winds would improve air quality to moderate in the afternoon, but that smoke was still likely to settle near the fire overnight and might reach, in their words, very unhealthy or even hazardous levels locally. The same location, the same day. Moderate at 3 in the afternoon, potentially hazardous at 3 in the morning, and look at which places the assessment singles out by name, because they are all the same kind of place. The Methau Valley, along Lake Chelan, the south end of Lake Wenatchee, and particularly the Entiat River Valley. Valleys, every one of them, long, narrow, terrain-bounded drainages, which is exactly where nocturnal cold air pooling concentrates smoke most severely. This produces a genuinely unfair distribution of harm. A person living in a town on an open plateau 30 miles from a fire may have decent air. A person living in a narrow valley 60 miles from the same fire, downhill along the drainage, may spend every night of the summer inside a bowl of smoke. The same assessment warned that plumes from the Kaiser Canyon and Modrite fires, pushed by strengthening southwest winds, could bring unhealthy air to Republic, Kettle Falls, Inchelium, and Colville, with the heaviest impacts from late afternoon through the morning. And it flagged something crossing a state line. Oregon's large fire complexes, it noted, would continue pushing smoke and haze northeast on persistent southwesterly winds, over into Washington, with surface-level impacts near Walla Walla in the Blue Mountains and across portions of the Palouse, locally unhealthy readings, again mainly during the overnight and early morning hours, a fire in central Oregon, degrading the air people breathe in eastern Washington in the middle of the night. Now put that against the Grasshopper fire, 3,500 acres, 0% contained, 0 personnel assigned. Grasshopper's plume does not know that. It does not check whether a crew was ordered. It rises, it travels, and at nightfall it comes down somewhere, into somebody's valley, into somebody's house, into somebody's lungs. And earlier in July, the numbers in this region got considerably worse than the word unhealthy. Part 13, 351. On the morning of Friday, July 17th, Farron Thorpe of the Washington Department of Ecology wrote that air quality readings in Spokane had been, and I'm quoting the capitalization as published, very unhealthy to even hazardous at times. The monitoring station at Liberty Lake in the Spokane metropolitan area had climbed into the hazardous category. Regional reporting that morning put the Spokane area above 300 on the air quality index, with Liberty Lake specifically at 351. Let me put that number on a ladder so it means something, because the air quality index is one of those scales people have heard of without knowing where the lines are. 0 to 50 is good. 51 to 100 is moderate. 101 to 150 is unhealthy for sensitive groups. Children, the elderly, people with asthma or heart conditions. 151 to 200 is unhealthy, and at that point the guidance applies to everybody, not just sensitive groups. 201 to 300 is very unhealthy. 301 and above is hazardous. Hazardous is the top category. There is nothing above it. The official guidance at that level is that the entire population is likely to be affected, that everyone should remain indoors, and that outdoor exertion should be avoided entirely. Liberty Lake was at 351. That is not a wilderness monitoring site. Liberty Lake is a suburb on the eastern edge of the Spokane metropolitan area, a metro of well over 500,000 people, and it recorded an air quality index of 351 on a Friday morning in July. What is actually in that air is fine particulate matter. The fraction meteorologists label PM 2.5, meaning particles 2.5 micrometers across or smaller. We went through the physiology of it in the smoke video earlier this month, so I will keep this short. Particles that small are not filtered by the upper airway. They travel to the deepest part of the lung, to the alveoli, where gas exchange happens, and from there the smallest of them cross into the bloodstream. The geographic footprint of the alerts through July tells you how widely this was distributed. At various points during the month, air quality alerts covered Adams, Benton, Ferry, Franklin, Grant, Lincoln, Okanogan, Pend Oreille, Skagit, Spokane, Stevens, Walla Walla, Whatcom and Whitman counties, 14 counties, and note that Skagit and Whatcom are on the western side of the Cascades, near the Canadian border. Those alerts were driven by smoke from fires in British Columbia. The state was being hit from 3 directions at once. There is one more layer to this, and it is the one that worries public health people most. On July 21st, Beth Friedman of the Washington Department of Ecology noted in the same forum that in addition to smoke, most of the state was simultaneously under heat advisories, and she wrote, "Health impacts can be amplified when it is hot and smoky. I want to label that carefully. Heat is a documented, quantified killer, the leading weather-related cause of death in the United States. Wildfire smoke is a documented, quantified health hazard with well-established cardiovascular and respiratory effects. What is genuinely unresolved, and an active area of research right now, is whether the two together are simply additive or whether they multiply. There is reason to suspect the latter. Heat drives people to open windows and stay outside in the evenings, which is exactly when the smoke settles, and both stressors load the cardiovascular system simultaneously. But I'm not going to tell you the science has settled that, because it has not. And now the cruelest part of this whole weather pattern, which I think is the detail that best captures what the Pacific Northwest is dealing with this month. The winds that clean the air are the winds that build the fires. In the same July 24th assessment that forecast daytime improvement to moderate, the critical fire weather section reads, "Critical fire weather conditions are expected to develop Friday afternoon and evening and will reach a peak on Saturday. Red flag warnings are in effect for most areas east of the Cascades due to the hot, dry and windy conditions. Widespread wind gusts between 35 and 45 miles per hour on Saturday will fuel continued active fire behavior and lead to rapid spread of any new ignitions. Saturday, wind gusts of 35 to 45 miles an hour. That Saturday was July 25th, and July 25th into July 26th is the operational period in which the Big Grass Fire grew by 171,742 acres. The exact wind that was forecast to lift the smoke out of the valleys and give people a few hours of breathable afternoon air is the wind that pushed a fire across 268 square miles of southeastern Oregon. There is no configuration of this weather pattern that is good for anybody. Calm air means the smoke settles and the valleys fill. Wind means the smoke lifts and the fires run. That is the whole menu. Santo Domingo's own closing line on that post is worth quoting, because it is the sound of a professional trying to keep people alert without frightening them. Even though the winds may help improve air quality in some areas, it's important to keep on our toes. New fires can develop quickly, and smoke from new ignitions can arrive suddenly with little warning. And 2 days before that, on July 22nd, the same multi-agency partnership had written a single sentence that I think is the most quotable line to come out of this entire event, precisely because of how carefully understated it is. We are on pace to have one of the worst wildfire seasons across the region in recent history. That is what this season is costing the people watching it from their windows. The next part is what it is costing the people walking into it. Part 14. 4 names from one burnover. Go back to the July 26th Incident Management Situation Report one more time, before it gets to a single acreage figure, before the geographic area table, before any of the numbers we have spent the last 2 hours pulling apart. The document opens with a death notice. Here it is, verbatim. On July 24th, a 4th firefighter from the U.S. Wildland Fire Service succumbed to injuries sustained while engaged in firefighting operations on the Knowles Fire west of Grand Junction, Colorado on June 27th. The firefighting community extends its condolences to the family and friends of the deceased. That is the first substantive paragraph in the document. Before the fires, before the acres. The event behind it happened on June 27th on the Knowles Fire near the Colorado-Utah border west of Grand Junction. What occurred there is described in the official record with 2 terms that I want to explain, because they are precise, and most people have never had to know what they mean. A burnover is when fire overtakes people who cannot get out of its way. It is the failure of the entire system of escape routes and safety zones that wildland firefighting is built around. Every crew on every fire is supposed to have identified where they will go and how they will get there if conditions change. A burnover means that plan did not work. A shelter deployment is what happens next. Every wildland firefighter in the United States carries a fire shelter, a small foldable structure of aluminized fabric and silica cloth that a person pulls over themselves and holds down against the ground. It reflects radiant heat and traps a pocket of breathable air. It is genuinely a last resort. Nobody trains to use one expecting to. It is designed to buy minutes, and it works sometimes. On June 27th, 3 firefighters died in that burnover. Their names were Emily Barker, 38 years old, of Clinton Township, Michigan, Nick Hutchison, 27, of Glendale, Arizona, and Sidney Watson, 27, of Warrior, Alabama, Michigan, Arizona, Alabama. Look at that geography for a second, because it is the mutual aid system I described 2 hours ago, rendered in human beings. 3 people from 3 states with almost nothing in common on a fire line in western Colorado, because that is how American wildland firefighting works. The 4th was Nathan Matthews, 43, of Lincoln, Nebraska, of the Wildland Fire Service. He was injured on June 27th and he died on July 24th. Nearly a month later, 4 people from 1 burnover. Now, I want to address directly why I am putting a Colorado fire in a video about the Pacific Northwest, because it is a fair question. The Knolls Fire is not in Oregon or Washington. It is not part of the Northwest geographic area. It has nothing to do with the Kaiser Canyon Fire or Big Grass. But at National Preparedness Level 5, the people being sent into the Northwest's 52 incidents come from the same national pool that Emily Barker and Nick Hutchison and Sidney Watson and Nathan Matthews were drawn from, under the same conditions, with the same margins. When I tell you that 2,149 additional people arrived in Oregon and Washington in a single day, those are the people I am talking about. Every staffing number in this video is a number of human beings standing in front of something that has already killed 4 of them this summer, and there is a second entry in the July 26th report that belongs alongside the first because the 2 of them are instruments reading the same dial. The report notes that 2 MAFS C-130 air tankers, along with support personnel from the 302nd Airlift Wing of the Air Force Reserve in Colorado, have been deployed to Klamath Falls, Oregon. It further notes that 1 MAFS C-130 from the 153rd Airlift Wing of the Wyoming Air National Guard and 1 from the 146th Airlift Wing of the California Air National Guard have deployed to Redding, California to support wildland fire operations nationally. MAFS stands for Modular Airborne Firefighting System. It is essentially a roll-on kit, a pressurized retardant tank and discharge system that can be loaded into the cargo bay of a standard military C-130 transport aircraft, turning a troop and cargo carrier into an air tanker in a matter of hours. The MAFS program exists because of a specific policy decision. The military does not compete with the commercial air tanker industry. MAFS aircraft are only activated when all commercially contracted large air tankers are committed, and the interagency system formally requests Department of Defense support, which means the MAFS line in that report is not a piece of colour, it is a status indicator. It says the civilian aviation fleet is fully spoken for, and the United States has begun converting military transport aircraft to fight its own wildfires. An airlift wing on a fire line in Klamath Falls. 4 names in a condolence paragraph. Both of those are what Preparedness Level 5 costs, measured in something other than acres, none of which is a new experience for this region. And that is the strange thing about the Pacific Northwest. It has been here before, more than once, and it kept the receipts. But before we get to those, I owe you something I promised at the start of this video. Part 15, what people are saying and what is actually true. Every time the American West burns at this scale, a set of explanations circulates that are not the ones in the federal reports. I said at the beginning of this video that we would go through them honestly, and that one of them contains a kernel that is genuinely correct. So here they are. I am going to give you each one in its strongest form, not a strawman, and then show you what the evidence actually supports. The first claim is that the fires were deliberately started. This takes several forms: coordinated arson campaigns, directed energy weapons, engineered ignition of some kind. The strongest version of that claim points at something real. To a person watching the news, it genuinely does look strange for dozens of fires to appear across an enormous area within a few days of each other. Ordinary experience says fires start one at a time, but the explanation is documented, boring, and forecastable days in advance on public data. Dry lightning. A single thunderstorm complex crossing the interior northwest can deposit hundreds of cloud-to-ground strikes across a region the size of a small country, with much of the rain evaporating before it reaches the surface. Every one of those strikes lands in fuel that has been curing since May. Some ignite immediately. Some smoulder in root systems for a day or two and surface later, exactly as D-gun shows described. The federal cause classification for the Kaiser Canyon fire the largest fire in Washington right now, is a single word: natural. In one ranger district in the Methau, one lightning event started 6 fires. The July 26th Predictive Services Outlook forecasts more of the same: isolated mixed wet and dry thunderstorms developing across southern Montana and Wyoming, capable, in NIFC's own phrasing, of several new ignitions. And there is a physics argument here that I find decisive. Consider the energy budget. A thunderstorm complex delivers, free of charge, hundreds of ignitions across thousands of square miles in exactly the conditions where they will take hold on a schedule meteorologists can forecast days out. There is no directed energy system on this planet that competes with that for efficiency. The atmosphere does it better, cheaper, and at greater scale than any technology anyone has built. The second claim is that burn scars are being cleared for development, or mining, or some transfer of land. The grievance inside that one is real, and I'm not going to dismiss it. Land use does change after disasters. That is a documented phenomenon with a long and genuinely ugly history in this country, and indigenous communities in particular have concrete, specific, historically grounded reasons for distrust. If you are a Colville tribal member watching your reservation burn, skepticism about what happens next is not paranoia, it is memory. But the specific claim collapses when you put it on a map. The Big Grass Fire is burning remote Bureau of Land Management rangeland 25 miles from a town of a few hundred people in the far southeastern corner of Oregon. That is some of the least developable land in the lower 48 states. And Kaiser Canyon is burning on the Colville Reservation, land held in trust, where the party suffering the loss is the tribe itself, and where what burned was a cemetery, a church, 45 structures and 120 archaeological sites. Nobody engineers a land grab by destroying the cultural heritage that establishes the claim to the land. That is the opposite of how that would work. The third claim is that the real numbers are being concealed, and that the fires are far larger than reported. And this is the one where I have to tell you that the underlying observation is correct. Reported acreage does lag reality, sometimes badly. I showed you the proof myself, an hour ago. The National Interagency Fire Center's own Incident Management Situation Report listed big grass at 220,000 acres on the same morning that another NIFC-sourced feed listed it at 280,000. A 60,000-acre disagreement inside one agency on one morning about one fire. If your position is that the official numbers understate what is burning, you are, on that specific point, right? But look at what follows from it. The reason for the gap is mapping lag, and the mechanics of that lag are published openly. GPS ground tracks, overnight infrared flights, satellite thermal detection, once or twice daily updates. The figures are explicitly labelled as estimates, and the inconsistency I just described was not uncovered by anybody. It was published by the agency itself in a free PDF at 7:30 in the morning, available to anyone with an internet connection. Concealment does not usually take the form of publishing your own contradiction before breakfast. The fourth claim is the sharpest, and it is the one I have the most sympathy for. The claim is that firefighters are being deliberately held back, that somebody is letting it burn. And at the level of lived experience, that is not wrong. There are fires in this report with nobody on them. The Grasshopper Fire has extreme fire behaviour, numerous residences threatened, evacuations in effect, and 0 personnel assigned. If you have been evacuated from your home outside Wamik, and you look up the official federal document for the fire that made you leave, and the personnel column says 0, you have not misread anything. There really is nobody there. But the cause is not policy in the conspiratorial sense. The cause is arithmetic, a national resource pool that ran out, plus a priority ranking that sends people first to the fires most likely to kill someone. And I want to be very direct about this, because I think it matters more than any of the theories. The honest version of this story is more disturbing than the conspiracy, not less. The conspiracy version says somebody in a room decided your house did not matter. That would be terrible, but it would also mean there is a decision that could be reversed, a person who could be replaced, a policy that could be changed. What the data actually shows is that there are not enough firefighters in the United States of America to fight the fires currently burning in the United States of America, and that the system has a formal, documented, professionally administered procedure for deciding which fires get abandoned. There is no villain in that. There is just a shortage and a queue. Which brings me to the last claim, and it is the one that comes from the other direction. That none of this is unusual, that fires have always burned, and that the coverage is alarmism. The kernel of truth in this one is substantial, and I want to give it full weight. Fire is native to these landscapes. Ponderosa forests in the interior northwest evolved with frequent low-intensity fire. Grasslands burned regularly for millennia, including deliberately at the hands of the peoples who lived on them, and a century of aggressive suppression has itself loaded these landscapes with fuel that would not be there under a natural fire regime. Anyone who tells you fire is simply an invader in this country is wrong. What the arithmetic does not support is the word normal. Normal is not the national system at Preparedness Level 5 in July. Normal is not 61% of the country's burning acreage and 60% of its firefighters inside 2 states. Normal is not a 250,000 acre fire with 65 people on it, or 96% of a national surge going to one geographic area, or the Washington Department of Ecology's own multi-agency smoke partnership writing that the region is on pace for one of the worst wildfire seasons in recent history. You can believe every word of the fire is natural argument, as I do, and still recognise that the response system is failing in a way it has not failed before. Part 16. The Benchmarks. The Pacific Northwest has a long institutional memory for this, and the benchmarks are specific. In July of 2014, lightning started 4 separate fires near the towns of Carlton, Twisp and Winthrop in Okanogan County, Washington, the same county where the Kaiser Canyon fire is burning today. Those 4 fires merged. The result was called the Carlton Complex. It burned 256,108 acres. It destroyed 353 homes. It caused roughly $98 million in damage. On a single day, the 17th of July, it destroyed 111 homes in and around the town of Pateros on the Columbia River. It remains, 12 years later, the largest single wildfire in Washington state history. The detail from Carlton that has stayed with people who worked it is the speed. On that Thursday afternoon, the 4 separate fires ran together and made a single push that covered a distance nobody in the state's fire community had seen a fire cover in a day. Power went out across the Metho Valley and stayed out for weeks. Communications failed. Ranchers fought fire on their own land with tractors and water tanks because there was nobody else there to do it. That last part should sound familiar. Carlton in 2014 produced for a few days exactly the condition that the July 26th report describes as a steady state across 2 entire states. The following August, a complex of fires burned a little east of the Carlton Scar in the same county. The Okanogan complex reached over 304,000 acres at its peak and forced the evacuation of Conconully, Twisp and Winthrop. 2015 is still remembered as the worst wildfire year in Washington's recorded history. But because those fires never merged into a single perimeter and were ultimately recorded as separate incidents, Carlton kept the single fire record. And on the 20th of August 2015, near Twisp, 3 firefighters died. Their engine crashed while they were trying to escape a fire that was overrunning them, and it was enveloped in flames. Their names were Tom Zabashevsky, Andrew Zajac and Richard Wheeler. Then there is Oregon and Labor Day weekend of 2020. On the 7th and 8th of September that year, an extraordinary east wind event swept across the state. Dry, downslope, sustained wind pouring off the Cascades toward the coast. It ignited or exploded 5 simultaneous megafires: Beachy Creek at 193,000 acres, Holiday Farm, Riverside, Lion's Head, and Archie Creek. 12 other fires burned alongside them. In a matter of days, more than 1 million acres burned in Oregon. More than 5,000 homes and businesses were destroyed, 11 people died, and inside that event there is a fire I want to single out because it makes a point that this entire video has been circling. The Almeida Drive fire burned 3,200 acres. That is small. On the July 26th report, it would not crack the top 20 in the Northwest. It killed 3 people and destroyed more than 3,000 structures because it burned through the towns of Talent and Phoenix, Oregon, rather than through forest. Acreage is a poor proxy for harm. 3,000 acres through a town is worse than 200,000 acres through sagebrush. That is why the priority ranking exists, and it is why the ranking is right. So where does July of 2026 sit against those benchmarks? Kaiser Canyon, at 110,000 acres, is less than half of Carlton Complex. Big Grass, somewhere between 220 and 280,000 acres, is comparable to Carlton on its own. A fire the size of the largest in Washington's recorded history, burning in Oregon with 65 people on it, and it is July. The Carlton Complex ran through July and August of 2014. The Okanagan Complex was an August fire. The Oregon megafires were a September event. But here is the difference that actually matters, and it is not about size. 2014, 2015, and 2020 were events the national system surged to meet. Crews came from everywhere. That is what those years looked like from the inside. An enormous, sustained, national mobilization arriving to help. In July of 2026, the surge has already been spent. There is one more comparison worth making, and it cuts against the easy conclusion, so I want to make it honestly. Carlton destroyed 353 homes. The Oregon Labor Day fires destroyed more than 5,000 structures and killed 11 people. Against those numbers, the Northwest structure losses this week, at least 106 buildings across all the incidents in the July 26th report, are far lower. That is real, and it is not an accident. It is partly luck, in the sense that Big Grass happens to be burning where almost nobody lives. But it is also the direct result of the priority ranking working. 15,000 people, deployed with a rule that says protect life first, have kept the human cost of an enormous fire load very low so far. So this is not a story about a catastrophe that has already happened. As of the 26th of July, it is a story about a system that has spent everything it has to prevent one, in the third week of a season that historically peaks in the 6th. Part 17. What is left to hold the line? I want to end where we started with the document. There is a column in the July 26th report labelled EST CTN, Estimated Containment. It is the date the incident management team believes the fire will be fully contained. It is a professional judgment filed by the people who know the most about each individual fire, and it is the closest thing in that report to a prediction. Here are those dates. Big Grass, August 8th. Kaiser Canyon, August 15th. The Hay Creek Complex, August 15th. Little Giant and the Roe Creek Complex, October 1st. Ptarmigan and Border 2, November 1st. Luna, November 30th. Read those last four again and understand what they encode. An incident management team filing an estimated containment date of November 30th in the North Cascades is not describing a suppression plan. There is no strategy that ends a fire on the 30th of November through firefighting. That date is a seasonal forecast. It says, this fire ends when the weather changes, and the weather changes around then. They are planning, on paper, in writing, in a federal document, to still be managing some of these fires when the snow arrives. And I want you to notice which fires carry those dates, because it is not random. Big Grass, the largest fire on the list, has an estimated containment date of August 8th, 12 days out. Kaiser Canyon, the most destructive, August 15th. Those are the fires with either a large organisation on them or an urgent reason to end them quickly. The October and November dates belong to Little Giant, Roe Creek, Ptarmigan, Border 2, and Luna. Look back at their staffing. Little Giant, 133 people on 19,000 acres of crowning timber. Ptarmigan, 4 people. Border 2 and Luna, 0. The fires with the fewest people on them have the latest end dates. That correlation is not a coincidence, and it is not a mystery. A fire that nobody is fighting ends when the weather ends it, and the weather in the Cascades ends fires in late autumn. So the containment date column, read across the whole table, is a kind of confession. It tells you which fires the system expects to put out and which ones it expects to outlast. Now let me give you the national year-to-date figures, and then tell you why they are the most frightening numbers in this entire video, which is not the reaction most people have to them. As of July 26th, the United States has had 42,157 fires this year, burning 4,072,528 acres. Against the 10-year average for the same date, that is 128% of normal for the number of fires, and 121% of normal for acreage. Elevated, clearly, but not historic, not a record, not off the charts, roughly a quarter worse than a typical year, and that is the point. The United States reached the top of its own national preparedness scale in July, with 3 months of fire season ahead of it, on a fire load that is only about a quarter above average. The system did not break under a once-in-a-century event. It broke under a moderately bad year, because the load was concentrated in one place instead of distributed across 10, and the fuel bed underneath all of it was already primed. We covered that on this channel earlier this month, in the video on the drought spreading across the country, the severe drought floor that has not moved in weeks. All of the fine fuel that is carrying these fires was cured and ready before a single one of them was struck. So the last question is the one I want to leave you with, and to ask it properly you have to look one more time at the rest of the map. Where would help come from? The Great Basin is at Preparedness Level 3 with 251,000 acres of its own burning. The Rocky Mountain area is at Level 3 with 222,000 acres, and it shed 277 people in a day. Northern California is at Level 3 and losing personnel. The eastern area is at Level 4 with a complex of fires in the Superior National Forest of Minnesota that has consumed both of the country's committed National Incident Management Organization teams. In Utah, the Babylon Fire is at 95% contained, and Cottonwood at 90%. Those crews are wrapping up, and in an ordinary year they would be the next wave heading north. Every one of those areas is holding its own line. None of them is in a position to lend. We have always believed that the question at the end of a summer like this was whether the fire was big enough, whether it broke a record, whether the acreage figure was larger than the last one. But what if that was never the question? What if the question has always been whether there was anyone left to send? The system did not break in a storm. Nothing collapsed on camera. There was no single moment you could point to and say, there, that is when it went wrong. It broke by arithmetic. Quietly, in a public document, published at 7:30 in the morning, and the sentence that announces it is 2 words long. National Preparedness Level 5. And out in Malheur County, 25 miles southwest of Jordan Valley, Oregon, there is a fire that added 268 square miles between one sunrise and the next, with communication infrastructure somewhere in front of it, and 65 people, 11 engines, no hand crews and no aircraft watching it move. That fire is not the emergency. That fire is the readout. So here is what I will be watching, and what you should watch too. Not whether these fires get contained, most of them eventually will, one way or another, by people or by weather. The thing to watch is the preparedness level on the other 9 geographic areas, because the Northwest has been drawing more than 2,000 people a day out of a national pool, and every one of those areas is currently holding at level 2, 3 or 4 with its own fires burning. The question is what happens the first time one of them steps up. Because on the morning that Great Basin or Northern California goes to level 5 alongside the Northwest, somebody in a coordination center is going to pick up the phone to order crews, and there is going to be nobody on the other end.